The crystalline spires of Exiler's capital city stretched high into the amber sky, their edges shimmering like jagged glass under the pale lavender clouds. For Alexander Reed, Earth's top diplomat, the view was both awe-inspiring and intimidating. This wasn't just a mission, it was humanity's first contact with the Exiler civilization, a race shrouded in mystery and notorious for their isolationist stance. Alexander's career and the fragile hopes of peace between two worlds rested on his success. As the shuttle descended, the atmosphere grew tense. The Exiler architecture, with its towering spirals and opalescent bridges, radiated a cold, alien beauty. We're about to make history, Alexander muttered to himself, adjusting his ceremonial uniform. His security detail, standing rigid behind him, offered no response. They, too, felt the weight of the moment. The shuttle touched down on the grand platform with a soft thud. Alexander emerged, his polished shoes clicking against the smooth surface as he strode down the ramp. Waiting for him was a delegation of Exiler officials. Their towering, willowy forms gleamed under the sunlight, their iridescent scales rippling with shifting hues. Their almond-shaped eyes fixed on him, betraying no emotion. The leader of the delegation stepped forward, inclining his head slightly. "Welcome, Ambassador Reed," he said, his voice smooth yet devoid of warmth. "I am Zaruk, Minister of Interspecies Affairs. On behalf of Her Majesty, Queen Liara, we extend our greetings." Alexander bowed deeply, ensuring every movement conveyed respect. "Thank you, Minister Zaruk. It is an honor to stand here today. I hope this marks the beginning of a meaningful relationship between our people." The words hung in the air like fragile glass, and while Zaruk nodded, the tension between them remained. As Alexander followed the minister through the city's shimmering streets, he couldn't help but marvel at the world around him. Floating discs carried citizens in flowing robes above the bustling pathways. The buildings seemed alive, their surfaces glowing faintly as though they were breathing. Yet, for all its beauty, there was an icy detachment in the air, as if the city itself was scrutinizing him. That evening, a grand banquet was held in Alexander's honor. The hall, constructed from translucent stone that caught the twilight's glow, felt like stepping into another dimension. At the head of the room sat Queen Liara, her presence commanding yet elegant. Her shimmering opalescent scales reflected the light, and the crystalline crown atop her head seemed to radiate authority. "You honor us with your presence, Ambassador Reed," she said, raising a goblet filled with a faintly glowing liquid. Her voice was musical, but her piercing gaze unsettled him. "May this be the beginning of a fruitful alliance." Alexander mirrored her gesture, lifting his glass to peace and understanding. As the evening wore on, Alexander couldn't shake the feeling that the Queen's gaze lingered on him a moment too long. The alien wine, sweet and deceptively light, flowed freely, and the diplomat found himself easing into conversations with the exiler nobles. Yet, beneath the laughter and polite exchanges, there was an unspoken tension. Questions lingered in every glance. Could humans be trusted? Would this alliance benefit their world or doom it? Late into the night, the Queen approached him. Her proximity was startling, her scales catching the light in mesmerizing patterns. "Ambassador," she said softly, her tone unreadable, "your people intrigue me. So much ambition for such a young species. But ambition can be dangerous." Alexander hesitated, unsure how to respond. "Ambition, when tempered with wisdom, can lead to great things," he replied carefully, her lips curved into a faint, enigmatic smile. "Let us hope so." As the banquet ended, the events of the night blurred in Alexander's mind. The wine had been stronger than he'd realized, and the corridors of the palace seemed to stretch endlessly. He stumbled through the halls, disoriented, only to find himself face to face with the Queen once more. Her expression was unreadable, her eyes glinting with something he couldn't quite place. Before he could speak, darkness claimed him. The morning light streaming through the palace windows did little to ease Alexander's unease. His headache from the alien wine lingered, and fragmented memories of the previous night haunted him. As he straightened his ceremonial jacket, a sharp knock interrupted his thoughts. "Ambassador Reed," a voice called from the other side of the door, cold and formal. "Her Majesty summons you." Alexander opened the door to find two exiler guards standing rigidly. Their faces were unreadable, their shimmering scales catching the sunlight. Without a word, they turned, leading him down the labyrinthine corridors of the palace. The throne room was a masterpiece of alien design, vast and echoing, with crystalline walls that refracted light into a kaleidoscope of colors. Yet, the beauty of the chamber did little to mask the tension within. Queen Liara sat upon her throne, her posture regal but her expression icy. Around her, advisors whispered in hushed tones, their eyes darting between the Queen and Alexander as he entered. Ambassador Reed, Liara's voice rang out sharp and unyielding. You stand accused of a grave violation. Alexander froze, confusion knitting his brow. Your Majesty, if I have offended you in any way, silence, she snapped, rising from her throne. The advisors fell silent as well, their whispers replaced by the sound of her heels clicking against the crystalline floor. Do not feign ignorance. Last night, in a moment of weakness, I allowed myself to let my guard down, and now, because of you, I carry your child. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Alexander's blood ran cold. That's impossible, he stammered. Do not insult my intelligence. Liara's voice cracked like a whip. Her piercing gaze locked onto his, her scales shimmering with the intensity of her fury. You think I do not remember? The wine may have dulled your mind, but I recall everything, your touch, your betrayal. Alexander's mind raced, fragments of the previous night coming into focus. Her proximity during their conversation, the warmth of her hand on his arm, the disorienting effect of the wine. Could it be true? Could a single encounter have spiraled into such a disaster? Your Majesty, I assure you, he began, but she cut him off, her voice trembling with both anger and sorrow. Assure me? You think mere words can erase the consequences of your actions. She placed a hand over her abdomen, her expression softening briefly before hardening again. This child is an abomination by our sacred laws. It threatens the very fabric of our society. I will be forced to abdicate. The weight of her words struck Alexander like a blow. This wasn't just a personal scandal, it was a diplomatic catastrophe. If the exiler people turned on their queen, the fragile peace between Earth and exiler would shatter before it even began. The murmurs of the advisors grew louder, their disdain clear. This human cannot go unpunished, one of them said, his voice dripping with venom. He has brought shame upon our people. Another advisor stepped forward. Execute him. Let his death serve as a warning to Earth. No. Alexander's voice rang out, his diplomatic instincts kicking in despite the panic rising in his chest. Your Majesty, please, let me explain. Let me help. Enough. Liara's voice was cold and final. Guards, take him to the dungeons. We will deal with this human at dawn. Two burly guards seized Alexander's arms, dragging him from the throne room. His protests fell on deaf ears, the queen turning her back on him as the advisors resumed their whispering. As he was forced down the winding corridors, Alexander's mind raced. How had everything unraveled so quickly? How could he fix this before it was too late? The dungeon was as alien as the rest of the palace, cold, sterile, and suffused with an eerie blue glow. A shimmering energy field served as the only barrier between Alexander and freedom. He paced the cell, his thoughts a whirlwind of fear and determination. The queen's fury, the child, the accusations, every element of the situation pointed to disaster, not just for him, but for the fragile alliance he had worked so hard to build. Hours passed in suffocating silence until a shadow appeared outside his cell. A figure stepped into view, a young exiler woman with lavender scales and sharp, intelligent eyes. She wore a cloak that partially obscured her features, but there was no mistaking the urgency in her voice. Ambassador Reed, she whispered, deactivating the energy field with a sleek device. We don't have much time. Come with me. Alexander hesitated but followed her into the dimly lit corridors. The woman moved quickly, her footsteps barely making a sound as she led him through the palace's labyrinthine passages. Who are you? He whispered. My name is Nira, she replied, glancing over her shoulder. I'm part of a faction loyal to the queen. We believe her child is the key to our people's future. The key? Alexander asked, his confusion deepening. There's an ancient prophecy among our people, Nira explained as they ducked into a hidden chamber. A star child, born of two worlds, will unite Exiler and lead us into a new era. Some believe the Queen's child is that child. Alexander's heart pounded. A prophecy? Unity? Could this child, born of an unintended encounter, really be the bridge between their worlds? The implications were staggering. But the prophecy also made the child, and by extension, the queen, a target. Nera continued, her voice low. Not everyone agrees. The conservative factions see the child as an abomination, a threat to our traditions. They've already begun plotting to overthrow the queen. We need to act fast. Alexander nodded, his diplomatic instinct sharpening. What's the plan? Nera's eyes glinted with determination. First, we protect the queen and the child. Then we expose the conspirators and rally those who believe in the prophecy. But we'll need your help, Ambassador. Your people's future depends on it, too. Alexander took a deep breath, the weight of the situation settling on his shoulders. I'll do whatever it takes. As they prepared for what lay ahead, Alexander realized this was no longer just about diplomacy or redemption. It was a fight for survival and for the hope of a united future. The night of the coup arrived like a storm brewing on the horizon. The Exiler Palace, a monument of crystalline beauty, now teetered on the edge of chaos. The conservative factions, emboldened by public dissent and whispers of treason, made their move. Loyalist guards were overpowered, and the once grand corridors echoed with the sounds of struggle. Alexander and Nera moved swiftly through the palace, avoiding patrols and making their way toward Queen Liara's chambers. They knew the conservatives would target her first, seeking to eliminate her and the unborn child, the embodiment of the prophecy that threatened their grip on power. When they reached the queen's chambers, the scene was grim. A group of hostile nobles surrounded Liara, their faces twisted with a mix of anger and fear. The queen stood tall despite the tension, her hand protectively over her abdomen. You have failed your people, one noble sneered, his voice trembling with rage. Your child is an affront to our traditions, a stain on the purity of Exiler. Step down, or we will remove you by force. Liara's gaze swept over them, her eyes burning with defiance. You claim to act in the name of tradition, she said, her voice steady despite the fear in her heart. But you fear what this child represents change. This child is not a threat, but a promise, a bridge to a better future. Before the nobles could respond, Alexander stepped forward, his voice cutting through the tension. Enough. If anyone is to blame, blame me. But do not let your fear destroy the chance for something greater than yourselves. His words gave the nobles pause, their unity fracturing as murmurs rippled through their ranks. The moment of hesitation was all Nera needed. She stepped forward, producing a small device that projected holographic evidence of their conspiracy communications, plans for the coup, and orders to assassinate the queen and the child. You call yourselves protectors of Exiler, Nera said, her voice sharp, but you've betrayed everything this world stands for. This is treason. The revelation struck like a thunderclap. Some nobles stepped back, their resolve crumbling. Others, more desperate, raised their weapons. Just as the situation threatened to spiral into bloodshed, an explosion rocked the palace, signaling the arrival of loyalist forces storming the gates to protect the queen. In the chaos, the unborn child made its presence known. A wave of energy pulsed from Liara, radiating through the room and freezing the attackers in their tracks. The sensation was indescribable, a warmth that carried both power and promise. For a moment, even the most fervent conservatives hesitated, their weapons lowering as awe replaced anger. The prophecy, Nera whispered, her voice trembling. It's true. Liara stepped forward, her voice ringing with authority. This child is not an abomination. It is the future of our people, the bridge between Exiler and Earth, and the promise of unity. Her words struck deep, and the tide began to turn. Loyalist forces pushed back the remaining opposition, securing the palace. The coup collapsed, its leaders arrested or fleeing into the night. As dawn broke, the city of Zero was still, the tension that had gripped it slowly fading. Alexander stood on a balcony overlooking the capital, the spires catching the soft golden light of morning. Beside him, Queen Liara looked weary but resolute. Her hand rested on her abdomen, a protective gesture that spoke volumes about the journey ahead. The battle is won, Alexander said softly, but the war for your people's hearts has just begun. Liara nodded, her gaze distant. They fear change, but they also see the truth now. It will take time, but this child can give them hope, something to unite them. The prophecy of the Star Child became a rallying point. Loyalist advisors worked to shift public sentiment, presenting the child as a symbol of unity rather than division. The revelations of the coup's conspiracy helped expose the dangerous ambitions of the conservative faction, weakening their influence. Meanwhile, Alexander worked tirelessly to stabilize relations between Earth and Exiler. The near war that loomed during his imprisonment was diffused through careful diplomacy. Both worlds recognized the significance of the child and the potential for collaboration. Months later, the Star Child was born. Zarella, as Lyara named her, was unlike anything either world had ever seen. Her violet eyes glowed with an otherworldly light, and her very presence seemed to inspire calm and wonder. Her birth was celebrated across Exiler and Earth, marking a new chapter for both civilizations. In the years that followed, the partnership between Earth and Exiler flourished. Cultural exchanges, joint scientific endeavors, and interspecies collaborations reshaped both societies. The prophecy of the Star Child proved to be more than legend. Zarella displayed abilities that defied explanation, her presence bridging the gap between species and fostering understanding. But challenges remained. Conservative factions on both sides resisted the changes, clinging to old prejudices. Whispers of external threats from beyond their shared systems added an undercurrent of unease. Yet Alexander, Liara, and Zarella faced these challenges together, their bond strengthened by the trials they had endured. Standing once more on the palace balcony, Alexander looked out over the transformed city. Beside him, Liara held Zarella's hand, the child now a curious and precocious toddler. Her violet eyes scanned the horizon, as though seeing beyond what lay before them. "What do you see, Zarella?" Alexander asked, smiling. "The stars," she replied, her voice soft but confident. "They're calling." Liara exchanged a glance with Alexander, pride and apprehension mingling in her expression. "Then we'll make sure you're ready," she said, her voice steady. Together, the story ended not with a conclusion, but with the beginning of family united by purpose, ready to face the unknown. As Alexander, Liara, and Zarella stood together, they embodied the hope of two worlds, proving that even the most unlikely unions could light the path to a brighter future.